So Biology Unit 1, May 2015. First question then, calculate the decrease in the percentage of females who smoked tobacco from 1990 to 2010. So first of all, finding 1990, looking up to the female line, writing your number there first of all, finding the 2010, going up to the female line, the grey line, and then finding that the difference there is about 9 to 10% between the 20 and 30 from the left axis. Part 2 suggests why smoking tobacco has decreased in the UK. It is a suggest because you won't have been told a specific reason, but you might be able to come up with a number of them. First of all, people might be more aware of the health risks as time goes by. The NHS encourages people and puts programmes in place to encourage people to stop smoking. Prices just keep going up and up and up and up, including the tax. There's been the smoking ban introduced. And it might just be that it's not socially acceptable anymore. So any good answer there actually gets you the mark, even if you're in doubt. You probably get the mark as long as you suggested something sensible. For B part 1, the main addictive substance is the nicotine, which is option D. Remember, carbon monoxide is the poisonous one, and tar is the one that causes cancer. For part 2, explain why smoking tobacco can cause lung cancer. So just gave that one away a second ago. The main substance to mention here is the tar in the cigarette smoke, and that is a carcinogen, which or cancer-causing compound. You could even get the extra mile and say that is going to cause a mutation or a change in your DNA, which is where the cancer comes from. Part 3. Explain why people who smoke tobacco may find it difficult to exercise. It goes back to the other chemical that I said was in tobacco a minute ago. Carbon monoxide binds to the hemoglobin in your red blood cells. Less active red blood cells means you can carry less oxygen. That oxygen is needed for respiration, so less oxygen, less respiration, less energy. One of the other sort of less obvious ones to me is the effect of the tar in the lungs. Tar coating the surface of the lungs means there's less of the surface available for diffusion of gas. We're talking again about oxygen there into the bloodstream, and again, less oxygen in the bloodstream, that's less respiration, less energy for the muscles. For question 2, part A, describe how pH affects the variety of organisms in the lake. So pH 7 on the left hand side, that would be neutral, and as we're going further towards the right, that's getting more acidic. In this case here, as the pH has been decreasing towards the acidic side, the number of species in the lake has also been decreasing, looking at that slightly wonky looking bar chart. So there's been less and less stuff there. All the organisms can be found over here where we've got pH 6, where it's all shaded in. So just a bit of a data handling exercise there. Question 2. The main pollutant that causes acid rain is sulfur dioxide. It'll dissolve in water and it'll make sulfuric acid. Another possible answer there could have been nitrogen oxides, which make nitric acid. All the rest there are not going to be responsible for creating acid rain. Carbon dioxide does make rain slightly acidic, but that's normal, and all rain is slightly acidic. It's not acid rain until it's got a lower pH. For part B, increase of nitrates and phosphates in lakes. As soon as I say in lakes, you should start thinking the keyword eutrophication and get your first mark for that. Eutrophication is where the nitrates and phosphates encourage algae to grow. That algae is going to block out sunlight as it grows, and it's going to lead to competition for light. So some of the plants and algae are going to die. When they die and sink to the bottom, they're going to get broken down by microorganisms. Those microorganisms need to get energy, so they'll be respiring and using up energy that's in the water. As more and more oxygen gets used up, there'll be less available for things like fish and other aquatic organisms. So they're going to start dying because there's not enough oxygen, and then they're going to start rotting. So it leads to quite a swampy, murky mess. Obviously that reduces, I've got to throw in a keyword there, the biodiversity, the number of species that can live there. There's only a few specialised creatures like bloodworms that can survive in the low oxygen environments, which is a little link into where indicator species are. where question C goes to, funnily enough, next. In clean air, you get lichen or lichen. In clean water, you're looking at things like mayfly nymphs, stonefly larvae. There's a whole range of stuff over here in the mark scheme, but just remember one of them, that's all you'll ever need. And in polluted water, I always remember the bloodworm. There's other things that are there as potential ones, but the bloodworm is red because it's got lots of extra hemoglobin so that it can suck as much oxygen out from the water as possible. So that gives you a reason to remember it rather than just a specific keyword. If we're having a look on number 3, here is the structure of a neurone, which for us we went through the other day. Part A then is a dendron leading to a dendrite, so both of those answers are absolutely correct if you put either of those down. B is the same as anything else in a cell, it's that blob in the middle is the nucleus, which should be the easy answer. The axon is labelled, and the axon has got the myelin sheath just around the outside of it in case that ever came up as a label this question. For part 2, the axon carries information along the neuron as B, electrical impulses. Remember that to use the word impulse when you talk about neurons, because it's not messages. That's a little bit too key stage 3. We want to be talking about the electricity being passed along. Part 3, as we mentioned, the myelin sheath surrounding it. What is its role? Like the plastic around a wire on an electrical wire, it is there as an insulator. So the first and primary use is to insulate it from other signals around the body. That insulation, as a consequence, helps to allow quicker electrical impulses or better conductivity for your second mark. When you're saying that, other words you might say which are acceptable, which say the same things, it speeds up the transmission, or it makes these signals or impulses go faster. Notice there on the mark scheme it says ignore references to messages. In part 2 at the top it says electrical impulses, it primes you. So when these are all part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, they're all about the same topic, so make sure that you're using each bit to try and help you. Part 4, there is a gap between neurons. State the name for this. It's a synapse, or a synaptic cleft, or a synaptic gap. As long as you've got the synapse bit in there, that's the key word we're looking for. Doesn't ask you about neurotransmitters in it, but the electricity gets across the gap by using chemicals. The electricity doesn't actually cross itself. It uses little messenger chemicals called neurotransmitters to cross the gap. For B, describe the route of an impulse through a reflex arc. It's just a straightforward flowchart that you might learn. So the first thing is you have a receptor detecting a stimulus. It will then go to the sensory neuron, which is on your sensor, like your ear, and then it'll be passed to a relay neuron. The relay neurons are found in your spinal cord or central nervous system, and in this case here, because it is a reflex, you don't want to be mentioning that it goes to the brain. It is a instantaneous, well, as fast as and as close to an instantaneous response as you can get. You don't have to think about it. So after being in the central nervous system, the relay neuron will pass it onto a motor neuron. The motor neuron is anchored into a muscle, which is your motor, or sometimes a gland, and then that muscle effects a response, like blinking or flinching or something like that. For question number 4, have a look up here and you can see that Huntington's is the capital H, which means it's the dominant. People with Huntington's can have the genotype capital H, lowercase h, or they could have both the capital H's. For part 2, where we're putting the Punnett square, the easiest place to look over is at the answer scheme. It says heterozygous, which means that when you populate in the top row and the side row, you want one of each. Hetero means one of each, just like heterosexual is a male and a female, whereas homo would mean 2 of the same. So it'd be homozygous recessive with 2 little h's, or homozygous dominant with 2 big h's. So in this case here, a big H and a little h, and a big H and a little h will lead to one with purely dominant genes for the trait, 2 heterozygous individuals, and 1 homozygous recessive. Looking at that then, linked into it, the probability of someone having Huntington's disease is going to be 75%, or 3 and 4, or 0.75. All are okay. The only thing you have to look out on questions like that, if it does ask you for a percentage, then write a percentage. In this case, any way of showing odds is acceptable. The reason it's 75% is this individual, and this individual all have the capital H for Huntington's, and part 1 primed you to, Huntington's is dominant, so it's going to be way easier to get it than not. So this one's looking at cystic fibrosis, one we should know in detail. It says why, if both parents are heterozygous, the chance of inheriting Huntington's disease is greater than the chance of cystic fibrosis. If you did the same genetic diagram, you'd get the same result, but there'd only be one person that getting it, because you need both of the genes to, both the recessive genes to get that disease. So first of all, you make a comparison saying Huntington's is a dominant allele, whereas cystic fibrosis is recessive. And then the second point I'd be looking at is saying you would need to inherit both recessive alleles to get the disease. For part 2, cystic fibrosis is the overproduction of mucus, which is A. Lots of people focus on the lungs as a symptom for that, where you have thick mucus in the lungs and you have to have physiotherapy to break it up in the morning. But it does affect anywhere else which produces mucus, which is going to include your digestive system, and in this question here, your reproductive system, which people don't look at as much. So you use mucus in your reproductive system in, for example, the sperm duct, where you get the any of the fluids asked. So add it to it, so where you actually turn your sperm into semen, the fluid that keeps the sperm moving in it. So if it's thicker, it's more sticky, then it gets blocked up in the tubes, or makes it harder for the sperm to get anywhere. For question 5, complete the sentence in the food chain. The oak tree obtains energy. So we're looking at, do you understand the key words? Autotrophically is it makes its own food, heterotrophically is where it feeds on something else, and parasitically is feeding on something else, where it's at its detriment, and saprotrophically is where you're basically feeding off dead stuff, you're breaking down stuff outside your body and taking that in. In this case, the oak tree is an autotroph because it's doing photosynthesis to make its own food. Heterotrophs are things like animals, parasites are things like leeches, and saprotrophs are things like fungi. So the energy available to the oak tree that could be transferred to the caterpillars was 97,000, calculate the percentage loss of energy. So when you're looking at the loss, you find the difference first of all between the 97,000 in the oak tree and the 7,760 that was passed on. Once you've found that answer, you can then work out a percentage that was lost. So over here you've got 2 different ways of working out your calculation. The answer that we're looking for is 92% of the energy lost. If you got 8%, you worked out how much was passed on. So you need to make sure that you answer the actual question on that bit. Energy loss, popular question when you're looking at these trophic levels, and it's the same answers every single time. It might be that not all of the organism is consumed. It could be that energy is lost through movement, through heat, through reproduction. It's quite easy to imagine some getting lost by excretion, that's pooing and weeing and things like that, because not everything is perfectly turned into the energy in the thing that eats it. For B, explain using 3 examples how some organisms benefit from mutualism. First of all, then, mutualism is where both organisms are benefiting. So you've got some very specific examples that come up in your lessons that are the same ones that appear on your exam mark scheme. Oxpeckers are a cool one, where you see the bird riding around on the ox. The benefit there then for the ox is that parasites are removed from it, so it can stay healthier and not get disease, and it can stay alive. The oxpecker is obviously getting food from the parasitic insects that live on it, the ticks and fleas and things, and that is getting food so it can stay alive. There's cleaner fish, which you might like from such Disney films, where they do the car wash song. But yeah, loads of large fish like sharks benefit from having cleaner fish come along. The sharks again benefit from not getting disease, not having parasites, and the cleaner fish get a free meal. Slightly harder end of the scale, nitrogen fixing bacteria from the nitrogen cycle. They work with legumes like beans. They will get nitrogen from the atmosphere, and they will fix it into nitrates, which are going to be useful for the plant to take up and use to make proteins and grow. And the bacteria are going to take resources, nutrients, materials from the roots to help them stay alive. So the plant basically photosynthesizes for it. And the last bit, the top end answer, chemosynthetic bacteria. So you're looking at hydrothermal vents, steep at the bottom of the sea, on the hydrothermal vents, volcanically active. There's no light, so you don't get any plants, but you do get bacteria producing energy from chemicals, and they live inside a tube worm, and the tube worm offers protection from the extreme heat. So the worms getting the food from bacteria, and the bacteria are getting protection from the harsh environment. So for the top end marks, we look here at the 6 mark, you need 3 examples, including at least one of the nitrogen fixing bacteria and one of the chemosynthetic bacteria, because they are the toughest one to get, the one that requires the most knowledge and the most background information. Last question then, I'd be happy if this one comes up on your exam, about homeostasis. Part that regulates the heat, the thermoregulatory centre, is the hypothalamus. The rest of them are all parts of the brains, but you won't have you looked at those in lesson, which is why you won't recognise the names. For part 2, how do blood vessels in the skin control internal body temperature? So the first things you're looking at the words vasodilation and vasoconstriction. Vasodilation is where blood vessels near the skin dilate and get wider to allow more blood flow through, and that blood is coming from your core where it's warm, so more warm blood to the surface. Skin goes red and you lose heat. Vasoconstriction is where the blood vessels constrict and get smaller, and that is where you get less of the warm blood near the surface. Your skin goes paler and you lose less heat to the surrounding area. Don't be talking about blood vessels moving. They don't move up and down. It's more that they just open and close. For part B, water content is controlled within the body. Give the name for this random word that you occasionally need to regurgitate. Osmoregulation. Remember the word because osmosis is the movement of water, so osmoregulation is the regulation of water, just like thermoregulation is the regulation of temperature, as mentioned earlier in the question. Maintaining glucose levels within a narrow range. This is your diabetes link into it, where you learn all about insulin. So the first part of the cycle is what everyone learns, foundation to higher tier. When you've had some food and your glucose level starts to rise, your pancreas, 1 mark, is releasing insulin, as another place for a mark, into the bloodstream. It travels through the bloodstream to the liver, where the liver is going to take glucose and convert it into glycogen. Now make sure you get the syllables right on that. People mash it up and start spelling different words. You've really got to be on the ball with these. Glucose is the sugar, glycogen is the stored sugar. This lowers your blood sugar levels back to normal. Okay? If the opposite happens, say you do some exercise and your blood sugar level starts to decrease, glucagon is released. Now I remember that by saying glucose is gone, so it's glucagon. Okay, so you get the right syllables in. Again, that's from the pancreas. Again, it moves in the blood, and again, it goes to the liver. And this time, it's the reverse. Glycogen is released and converted into glucose, which raises the sugar in the bloodstream. Both those parts mirror each other. So if you can do one part, you can do the other part, even if you struggle on naming the hormones. If you look down here, for the top end, you need to talk about both raising and lowering blood sugar levels, and you need to include the hormones. Okay? You might miss out some of the key points in the answer, and you can still get the full marks, but you've got to know about the raising and lowering and the insulin and the glucagon as important key parts. And that looks like it's the last question on the test. Right, grade boundaries. If you wanted an A star, you wanted to get 51 out of 60, an A, 47 or above, B, 36 or above, C, 25 or above, D, 14 or above, or an E, you need to score more than 8. Well done, ladies and gents.